time so well? Well, one is the stethoscope, which is not going to change, and 100 years from today, probably we're going to use the same technique, maybe electronically this time, but not nothing much more than that. We have the electrocardiogram, which is around us for about 100 years, a little bit more. And we have the electroencephalogram, which is around us for 80 years. In between came a lot of other technologies. Most of them fell by the wayside. Why? Because these technologies were allowing us to get a first seat look in either the brain or the heart, depending whether you're talking about the electrocardiogram in the second case or the electroencephalogram in the first case, without opening holes under the human body, that is, doing it non-invasively. Well, so with all these tools in our hands, it was high time that people started making theories. Because if you don't have theories, you really don't describe anything. You can describe a lot of facts, but facts are very difficult to remember. What you should do when you have the facts is try to fit them together into a theory. Try to make something come out of it, so that you can generalize, so that you can use your knowledge and not try to remember that if this person has a palsy means a slight, let's say a slight paresis or paralysis of the face, and I look at him, I have to remember that 25 years ago I had seen a lady during my rounds and my professor had explained that this was a facial palsy, right? It means that once I look at the palsy, I don't have to recall the initial facts. I have to have a theory to explain it. And this is what science is all about. And with all these tools, well, guess what? Theories started coming out. Theories about how our brain functions. And in 1932, Lord Edgar Adrian and the giant of neuroscience in the 20th century, Charles Sherrington, they both won the Nobel Prize for their research on how neurons function, and Charles Sherrington in particular about how the brain is organized. Sherrington is the guy that coined the term neural center. In other words, he believed that there were special centers in the brain that had very peculiar, very distinct functions. Okay? Now, I told you a little bit before, or an hour ago, I told you that the way that these things, we understand these things is by having the technology. Well, guess what? Charles Sherrington described the brain in terms of a command structure made out of centers because he had just lived through the First World War. And the First World War was the first war where there were very long chains of command and very many different centers that each one of them had a specific job to do. So when he came back from the war to England, he said, this is it. Our brain must be doing exactly what the generals do at work. They sit around the table and they move around, you know, battleships and battalions and this and that, and they don't know what they're doing. They're doing war on paper, but out there people getting killed. So he managed to put a theory, and if you really come down to it, it's not that different in its thinking from what Descartes had said long time ago, that there is this little soul sitting in the pineal gland pulling levers. So, in 1932 also was another development. A guy by the name Tonis managed to take the invention of Hans Berger, which was showing what one part of the brain is doing, and by putting many electrodes on top of our head, managed to record from many, many places and he invented in effect the first multi-channel EEG recordings. So, are the slides running okay on your side? Yeah, okay. So in 1936, there is another big Nobel Prize. A guy by the name of Dale, Henry Hallett Dale, who got the Nobel Prize because he discovered that one cell, one neuron, uses one neurotransmitter. This became the so-called Dale principle. It has been the way that we understood the brain to function until 10 years ago. It is only 10 to 15 years ago that we realized that the brain is using sometimes other compounds other than the classical neurotransmitters. Today it still holds that one neuron produces one transmitter, but it produces a lot of other things like peptides, like modulators, like other things, and all these things together is what makes the brain function. But the Dale principle, although in its deathbed, it's still not dead. Okay? And in 1944, right at the end of the war, Erlangen and Gasser received the Nobel Prize for discovering the different sizes of nerve fibers conduct with different velocities. I'll bring you back to what we had talked in general physiology, and if you recall, we had talked that as you move along a nerve and you measure the potential, the compound action potential, that is the action potential of which is composed of many small individual action potentials, not the action potential, but the electrical phenomenon that's composed of a lot of small action potentials. As you move down the hand, or if you move down your leg, then fast fibers move much faster than the rest, and the wave shape of this phenomenon changes. If you recall, we had drawn a long action there with many fibers, and we had shown how things change. You recall that? Yes or no? Yep? Okay. So, this is not that many years ago. 60 years ago, most of us have parents or grandparents in that age. So, we are coming to very, very modern things now. And in 1949, when I was 1 year old, Rudolf Hess won the Nobel Prize for describing the different functions of the diencephalon, that is, the stem upon which the whole brain is built. Okay? In other words, not only we're able now to electrocute our brain in different areas and see that our hands and legs moved, but we could go deeper inside and give a description of how these things are processed in the next station from the cortex down to our spinal cord. So, 1953, all of a sudden, we have another great discovery that had to do with electroencephalography, and this was the rapid eye movement. When your partner sleeps, without disturbing him, sit by him and look at his closed eyes, and once in an hour or so, you'll see that his eyeballs start moving without him opening the eyelids, back and forth, in a very rapid fashion and very erratically. This is called the rapid eye movement. Well, in 1953, not only this rapid eye movement was discovered, and it's really a wonder why it took so long to be discovered. But what came along with it was that if you woke up the person when his eyes started playing this game, you found out that he was dreaming. So it was the first time that we managed to find out a physical correlate of dreaming. Today, sleep research is still in its infancy. it's not very far from where it was in 1953. Well, a lot of things have changed. We have a better understanding. We know why things are so. But in effect, don't forget that we sleep about 1/3 of our lives, and this was the gateway to that 1/3 of our life. The work by Kleitman and Naserinsky, who described the REM sleep and the fact that we dream during this time. Well, in 61, von Bekesi, working absolutely with cadavers, doing no experiment on human beings, but doing experiments on cadavers, he was able to decipher the physical mechanism that the cochlea uses in order to transfer the pressure waves in the atmosphere, the sound waves, into nerve impulses. And he did that, as I said, not on living subjects or living animals, but he did that on cadavers, because there was no other way he could dig out the cochlea and look what happens to it when he lets sound hit the eardrum. Thank God for him. If you're a good anatomist and you perfuse the dead body with all the embalming liquids, you manage to keep these structures very, very intact. And of course, if you have an intact eardrum, then everything can be proven. 1963, another big day. 3 people. They're still screaming outside there? Okay. That's okay. Okay, 1963, John Eccles, Alan Hodgkin, and Andrew Huxley received the Nobel Prize for 3 things. First of all, Eccles got it because he had propounded the theory about synaptic transmission, that indeed there were chemicals and only chemicals involved, both in exciting other cells and in repressing them. But the real big thing was Hodgkin and Huxley, who described the physics of the nerve action by using the action of we have talked about it again in general physiology, using the action of the giant squid Loligo. Loligo is a squid that is very abundant around Massachusetts. It can get about 4 feet long, maybe more. And if you don't watch it and squirts upon you, you can become black from all the ink that it throws. Also, your equipment says goodbye to you because it creates tremendous voltage outages. Now, 1967, to come to the last 40 years, there is another Nobel Prize for discoveries that have to do with the physiological and the chemical visual processes in the eye. It is the first time that we can describe not only neurotransmitters, but we can describe how the eye is built. And 3 years later, Axelrod, Euler, and Katz get their Nobel Prize for the catecholamine neurotransmitters and the effect of psychotropic drugs. Because now we know for the first time, and this is only, mind you, 35 years ago, we found out that it was the neurotransmitters that change, that make us hallucinate, that make us happy, that make us depressed, that make us sleep, and so on. It's only 35 years ago. Of course, Bernard Katz didn't have to do much with what Axelrod and Euler did. Bernard Katz received his Nobel Prize because he explained how the miniature end plate potentials are created. If you recall, we had again talked about them in basic physiology, and if you recall, I had talked to you that he found the statistics of the miniature end plate potentials by using the same methods that the Royal Air Force in England used to find out whether Hitler could manipulate his V2 bombs or not. And of course, they had found that at that time that the bombing of London was random, and using the same statistics, that is the Poisson distribution, Katz was able to show that minute amounts of neurotransmitter are randomly released at the synapse. Now, even 35 years later, we have still not fathomed the real meaning of that discovery. Because what that tells you is that the brain is not only endowed with a system that allows communication, but it has a way that randomly keeps every part of that system awake, even by making noise. Like the people outside of your door come and make noise once in a while to keep you interested in what I'm saying. So, 1977, peptide hormones come along. You recall that we had talked about the Dale principle. Now we have peptide hormone production that is associated with the brain. And in 1981, Hubel and Wiesel became the recipients of the Nobel Prize for work they had done at least 20 years before, because they were able to show how different cells in the brain code for different things of the outside reality. In other words, they showed that there were cells that coded for right angles, cells that coded for movement, cells that coded for vertical movement, cells that coded for reaching things, cells for coding for color, and so on and so forth. They got in 1981 the Nobel Prize, and there has been a lot of work that has been done since then. Finally, in 1990, everybody thought that now was the day that we could really put the whole story together and finally decide whether we have a soul that is separate from our physical existence or not. So on we went, and President George Bush, the father of the president now, declared the decade of the brain, saying that within 10 years we should have really resolved all these things. Well, guess what? We haven't resolved, not only we haven't resolved any of these things, we are just as far away as we ever were. In fact, 90 years before President Bush declared the decade of the brain, which ended a few years ago with very, very minimal results, Sherrington had already said that it is very difficult for someone to understand the brain. It is like you're trying to climb a mountain. You can always see the top, but somehow you cannot count how many miles you have to walk to get there. And every time you take a rest, it always seems like you just started. Okay? So much for the history of the brain. And let's get, rather not the history of the brain, but rather the history of our understanding of the brain. And we are going to talk from this point on about what we need to learn out of all these things that I described that will help us acquire the principles and the skills so that we can recognize and we can manage neurologic disease. If you are willing, I would say that we take a 5-minute break now and we go into the second part in a little while. Is that okay? Okay. Okay, I'm going to hang up. I'm going to call you back in exactly, let's say in 10 minutes, okay?
10 minutes, yeah.
10. Please don't go away too far because I really want to continue and finish today with what I have. Okay? By the way, who is going to tell me how are things there? Ahmed?
Takashi, see. Takashi will tell you, Takashi. Everything is good,
Everything
We're getting strong.
everything is normal now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. Next week I'll be up there. I'll probably be there for 3 days. I'm planning to come on Wednesday and stay until Saturday.
You're most welcome.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
sure, are you going to be, okay, what are you doing the last week of April? Are you coming here?
What am I doing about what?
Last week of April. Are you going to be here?
I think so.
Last week?
Yes. I think so.
Isn't that like an Easter holiday? Catholic Easter?
When is your last day of the course?
Oh, in June. No, it's in June. That is in June.
Yeah,
Last week of April.
Easter is, yeah, I probably will. Depending. I cannot tell you because I have a case of cancer in my immediate family and I really have to pay some attention to them. But other than that, if I can, I will because Easter is a good time to be there.
No, because I'm going to Canada that week.
Anyway, I'll come and we'll go out at that time.
Okay.
All right. Τι γίνεται, παιδιά, κόφτω. Εντάξει, ρίξτε τη γραμμή. Ναι, ρίξτε. Τι έγινε? Δεν γίνεται αλλιώς. Δεν γίνεται αλλιώς. Τι γελάς, παιδί, τρως, μη φοβάσαι. Αυτός να κοιτάς, εγώ δεν έχω πρόβλημα. Στράτο δεν γίνεται. Κοίταξε, δεν γίνεται αλλιώς. Δηλαδή, φυσιολογία και νευροφυσιολογία θα το παρακολουθούν. Είναι καλό μάθημα αυτή τη φορά. Είναι σκληρό μάθημα.
Έχει και φυσιολογία, μάθηματα.
Ναι, κάνω και φυσιολογία.
Α, είναι άλλο τμήμα αυτό.
Όχι, το ίδιο τμήμα, άλλη μέρα.
Τι έχει? Τους κάνουν και άλλοι μαθήματα, έτσι, από
Μόνο εγώ και ένας από τη Σόφια. Είναι ο πρίτανης της Σόφιας, ο οποίος είναι πράγματι πολύ καλός ανατόμος, φοβερός ανατόμος. Παρόλο που έχουν έναν πάρα πολύ καλό ανατόμο στη Βάρνα. Ο ανατόμος τους δηλαδή είναι... Πραγματικά μαθαίνεις ανατομία κοντά του. Δηλαδή δεν είναι ότι ξέρει να μεταδίδει. Αλλά αυτός της Σόφιας δεν είναι μόνο ανατόμος, είναι και καλός στην ιστολογία. Και ο ένας κάνει την ανατομία μαζί με τον άλλον, και οι δυο μαζί, και η ιστολογία τους κάνει αυτός από τη Βάρνα. Και εγώ από εδώ, τη φυσιολογία. Όχι. Αυτή είναι από 25 μέχρι 30 κάτι.
Είναι ένα μικρό τμήμα, δηλαδή, έτσι.
6 άτομα είναι.
Γιατί κάνουν αυτή τη εξετάσεις και στη συνέχεια.
Κάθε εξάμηνο. Το κάθε εξάμηνο δίνουν 4 φορές. Θα κάνουν 2 quiz, ένα midterm και ένα final. Αλλά όταν τελειώσουν, αυτά δεν μετράνε. Αυτά είναι να τους δώσεις έναν βαθμό. Όταν τελειώσουν πρέπει να περάσουν, δηλαδή στο δεύτερο έτος, πρέπει να περάσουν το πρώτο μέρος των boards. Ναι, δηλαδή στην Αμερική. Και τότε έχουν το δικαίωμα να μεταγραφούν πίσω σε ιατρική σχολή στην Αμερική.
Έχει κανένας από αυτούς καταγωγή από Βουλγαρία?
Κανένας. Μία είναι από τη Σρι Λάγκα, μία από το Ισραήλ.
Γιατί πήγε στο Ισραήλ ο ένας, είπε θα πήγαινε στο Ισραήλ, κάτι κάποιος.
Ένας είναι, καλά είναι Ιαπωνέζος, αλλά δεν είναι Ιαπωνέζος, δηλαδή από την Ιαπωνία. Μάλλον είναι από την Ιαπωνία, αλλά έχουν μεταναστεύσει εδώ και 20 χρόνια στην Αμερική. Και δύο είναι Αμερικανογεννημένοι, αλλά μουσουλμάνοι.
Και στη Βάρνα τι κάνουμε?
Η Βάρνα έχει κάνει μια συμφωνία με την Ένωση των Αμερικανικών Ιατρικών Σχολών, γιατί στην Αμερική οι σχολές παίρνουν πολύ λίγους. Δηλαδή για να μπεις πρέπει να είσαι στο top 99%. Έτσι. Και ποτέ δεν παίρνουν δύο άτομα από το ίδιο σχολείο. Δηλαδή, αν είστε δύο καλοί σε ένα σχολείο, ένας θα μείνει απ' έξω. Είτε θέλει είτε δεν θέλει. Δηλαδή, όχι, μπορεί να πάει σε μια άλλη σχολή, δεν σημαίνει, αλλά η ίδια σχολή ποτέ δεν κρατάει. Και είναι πολύ σκληρά τα πράγματα. Δηλαδή, αν δεν περάσει τα board στο δεύτερο έτος, τελείωσε. Πας σπίτι σου. Οπότε ξεκινάνε 100 και μένουν 80 στο δεύτερο έτος. Αυτοί τώρα, εφόσον έχουν περάσει τα board, δικαιούνται να πάρουν μια από αυτές τις 20 θέσεις και να συνεχίσουν. Αν δεν τελειώσουν εκεί, θα τελειώσουν στη Βουλγαρία, θα δώσουν το δεύτερο και το τρίτο μέρος των boards. Αλλά σε 4 χρόνια βγαίνουν γιατροί. Αλλά έχουν όλοι ένα πρώτο πτυχίο.
Έχουν πρώτο πτυχίο.
Ναι, δεν μπορεί να πει σαν
Το βιολογικό ή το...
Αυτή η Εβραία που έχω δεν την είδα τώρα, αλλά είναι λογικό γιατί είχαν και αυτοί Γιόμ Κιπούρ και άλλες μαλακίες να δω τώρα. Μάλλον όχι. Η Πάσχα. Είχαν Πάσχα κι αυτοί και θα είναι φαντάζομαι στο Ισραήλ. Δεν θα έχει έρθει ακόμα δηλαδή. Αυτή που είναι έχει 2 μάστερς από την Αμερική, διδακτορικό από το London School, το Imperial College στο Λονδίνο, και πέταξε ένα paper προχθές στα προκλητά δυναμικά, το οποίο έκανε πάταγα στο Nature. Είναι αυτό που σου έλεγα. Να δείχνεις, ας πούμε, ποιο μέρος του εγκεφάλου, στο ποιο μέρος του εγκεφάλου είναι responsible για το σεξουαλικό excitement. Τους έκανε προκλητά δυναμικά, γνωσιακά προκλητά δυναμικά με τσόντα. Και φοβερή, φοβερή δουλειά. Και τώρα λέω στον Πιτσαλίδη να πάει στην αυτή να πει ο ένας κάνει τα γνωσιακά προκλητά δυναμικά, να κάνω κι εγώ.
Θα κάνει τσόντα.
Αυτός θα κάνει τσόντα. Μαλάκα δεν είναι άγγιξες, θα σε στείλω στο Ισραήλ να την κάνεις.
Αυτή αξίζει τουλάχιστον αυτή φανησιακός.
Αυτή το διάβασμα θα έχει να πει να τρέχει.
Καταρχήν.
Και Εβραία φίλε. Όμως συνάντηση φαινιστής.
Δεν πειράζει, θα αλλάξω. Περιτομή θα κάνει. Περιτομή θα κάνει πρώτα.
Λοιπόν, κοίταξε, άμα θα κάνεις περιτομή,
Δεν κάνουμε και προστατήσεις και μαλακίες.
λοιπόν, αν θα κάνεις περιτομή, θα σε στείλω εγώ σε έναν ειδικό ραβίνο, ο οποίος είναι ορθόδοξος.
Ο Ορθόδοξος ραβίνος θα βάλει και κοτσιδάκια.
Οι Ορθόδοξοι ξέρεις πώς κάνουν την περιτομή. Με τα δόντια. Οπότε θα σου πετάει και...
Μιλάμε. Και να μας κάνουν εμάς τα μαθηματικά προκλητά δυναμικά μετά.
Και να στρώσει χαρακτήρες. Κάνει κανένα 500.
Λοιπόν, μάθατε τίποτε, μπα.
Είδαμε για πουρκίτζα, μα όχι, αυτά δεν είναι άσχετα. Αυτά είναι από τα... Αυτά από τα...
Σ' αγαπώ. 5 ώρα το απόγευμα καφέ.
Κι εγώ.
Και εγώ σ' αγαπώ. Ματάκια μου.
Ξέρεις, φίλες.
Τι είναι, τελείωσες.
Θα βάλω σε μια σειρά τα slides που μου έχεις δώσει, που έχεις φτιάξει και θα τα συμπληρώσω λίγο και θα κάνεις εσύ το άλλο μάθημα.
Μια εβδομάδα.
Τι είπες?
Άμα είναι και Εβραία, αλλά για τον Πιτσαλέ τι κάνει και κονέ. Έτσι, έτσι. Για το φίλο σου. Ορίστε.
Γελάει.
Τώρα σκέφτεται από το και χαίρεται γι' αυτό.
Σου λέει, πάρα πούμε.
Θα του λέξει για το φίλο του. Όνομα Γκουσγκούκ θα λέει. Την ώρα που θα λες το άλλο.
Και θα πας τελικά.
Τώρα είμαι σε διαδικασίες.
Δηλαδή,
Μου έστειλαν αυτή τη φόρμα που σας είπα.
πήγες συμπλήρωσες.
Πλήρωσα, την έστειλα πίσω. Σε αναμένει. Δεν ξέρω, είναι και θα ανοίξει δικό του. Βλέπω λοιπόν.
Τι είναι τώρα?
Καλά.
Πότε βρεθούμε? ότι δεν θα μπορέσω γιατί πρέπει να ετοιμάσω την Παρασκευή, να κάτσω να κάνω τα slides για την Παρασκευή το πρωί.
Την Παρασκευή το πρωί είναι μία Παρασκευή. Είστε προεδρείο στην ομιλία.
Σε ποιον? Στην ομιλία σου.
Ναι, 8 με 9 που είναι.
Δηλαδή εμένα βάλαν προεδρείο σε σένα για να έχουν 2 ακροατήριο, δεν είναι καλά πες το.
Όχι, είναι κι άλλη πρόεδρος.
8 η ώρα ποιος θα έρθει σε συνέδριο, τι μαλάκες ρε παιδί.
Αυτοί μιλάνε τουλάχιστον.
Ποια μέρα είναι?
1η Απριλίου.
Στα ψέματα τα παιδιά.
Και εγώ τι ώρα κάνω την ομιλία μου, τι ώρα λέει το πρόγραμμα, 2, 1, 2.
Φαντάζεσαι.
Σράμπα.
Πρέπει να ετοιμάσω την ομιλία γάμο του. Τι έγινε, δεν μάθαμε.
Σαββατοκύριακο θα είστε εδώ. Σαββατοκύριακο θα είστε εδώ.
Σαββατοκύριακο θα είμαι, ναι, Σαββατοκύριακο θα είμαι, ναι. Δηλαδή θα είμαι, Παρασκευή έχουμε αυτή την μαλακία.
Εντάξει, εγώ σκέφτομαι και μεσημερεύω, οπότε ή Σάββατο Κυριακή.
Όχι, Κυριακή το πρωί έχω να κάνω μια ομιλία στα Γιαννιτσά και εκεί σε ένα γκρουπ και φυσικά μετά θα επακολουθήσει κατάνοιξη, οπότε ξέχασε το.
Καλαποντιακό γλέντι θα είχε.
Γιαννιτσά.
Μπορεί να πάρει κάποιο που είναι μέλος του ΕΑΕ.
Φυσικά.
Από την...
Όχι, θα πάω να τους πω να το φτιάξω. Μη συνδέεσαι. Εσύ κάνε ένα meeting.
Θέλω να τα βάλει
μαζί
στο
τους.
γραφικό του.
Ναι, φυσικά. Τι.
Καλά, που κάνω συνέχεια meeting μαζί τους. Μετά την μπάλα. Πριν και μετά την μπάλα.
Σειρά και αυτά γιατί.
Κάτω το ποντί.
Θα τους πούμε σε λίγο να τα βγουν. Σε αυτούς θα πει γεια σας και τα λοιπά.
Μήπως θα είναι καλύτερα.
Θα μιλήσει πως θα
Κάτω κοντινά,
Everything all right? Maybe I should. I should show you. I have a few of my students here, my graduate students. Hi. So, this is Christo. This is Christo. Κατέβασε προς τα κάτω. Κατέβασε προς τα κάτω. This is Christo. The other guy, this is Stratos. This is the tallest guy of the group. Okay? And his name is Vasily. And this is the president of all of them. And he's also Christo. Now, you know, we have a system here for his PhD. Each one of them uses the others as experimental subjects. Okay? And what's that, Visaji? What? Well. Okay, give it a try. Okay, should we go on? Yeah. All right. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what are the most common neurologic conditions, because it doesn't make sense to talk about neuroscience unless we have something to do with it. And of course, what you are going to have to do with it is to face and resolve, to the best of your ability, common neurologic conditions. Unless one of you becomes, or some of you become neurologists. Any of you that wants to become a neurologist? Okay. In which case you're going to do exactly the same thing, only a little bit, you're going to pay a little bit extra for your insurance, that's all. Because a GP will never get sued for not managing something absolutely right, but a specialist does get sued, okay? So what are the most common neurologic conditions? First of all is cerebrovascular disease. Now we put it first of all because you probably know that 1/3 of the people in the world die because of an infarct or of hemorrhage in the brain. The numbers are roughly 1/3 die, 30% die of that, 30% die of their heart, 30% die of cancer, and 10% die out of everything else. So cerebrovascular disease is there because it is really something that concerns our world very, very much. The next thing you're going to face is seizures. Seizures are, can be of many, many origins. We are going to discuss some of them here. But you're going to also face them in different parts of your careers, irrespective of what you become, because if you become pediatricians, you can see seizures in children either of neural origin, purely neural origin, or of fever origin, but in order for a seizure to happen, fever must act on the central nervous system. You're going to find them in every case that you have metastasis of tumors to the brain, and so on and so forth. And of course you're going to have them even in cardiovascular disease, because a lot of times cardiovascular disease does manifest with seizures. Not very often, but there are cases, especially if you have aneurysms that are not ruptured, but they do throb. Anyway, something that everybody has at one point in his life or another is headaches. And this is a very common neurologic condition also. And we start with things now that are not that terrible in terms of being life-threatening, but are very terrible in terms of the quality of your life. And other than headaches is back pain, incontinence, disequilibrium, visual symptoms, dementia. Well, as people grow older, dementia becomes more and more prevalent. Movement disorders, the same thing. As people become older, Parkinson's disease takes bigger toll. And Parkinson's disease is a movement disorder. But this is not the only movement disorders we are going to meet here. There are movement disorders which come from other causes, and we're going to discuss them down the line. Neuromuscular disease is another very interesting part. Well, most of you know of the famous British physicist Hawkins, who is the guy that invented the black holes, or he has described the black holes. He writes a lot of books by using only his brain nowadays, because he's totally paralyzed because of neuromuscular disease. And finally, something that is more common than you think, and this is acute mental status changes. Okay? So, in order for us to be able to navigate through all that, we have to really talk about the symptoms and signs of neurological disease. And
So
at least,
what is incontinence?
what is what?
Incontinence?
Incontinence is when you cannot hold your poo-poo or your pee. Okay? if you notice old people that are in rest homes, they put large size Pampers on them. You know what Pampers is? This is what they put around. Okay. Well, there are Pampers for under year old and over. Well, there are some people like they start on them early, and some people that start on them late. But anyway, incontinence is a big problem, and strange as it sounds, it hits both men and women, and in women it is something that appears fairly early in their lives for many reasons that have to do with their previous number of births they have given, or other sexually related reasons, but it can appear in a woman as early as 55. But don't think that that incontinence is very far from all of us. The only thing we need is to get old enough. Anyway, I already talked to you, and I said that about this subject, and I said that the central nervous system is really the command structure of our existence. Well, apart from being the command structure of our physical and mental existence, it is also a very elaborate communications infrastructure. Okay? And I like you to think in these terms, to think in terms of telephone lines, if you really are interested in learning a little bit about the way neurology works. Now, I will venture to say that most of our nervous system, most of its extent, is devoted to communication. Okay? And it's characterized by communication infrastructure characteristics. And if we take a brain and we put it inside the skull and we make everything transparent, this is how we look. And the periphery and the perimeter of our skull contains the cortex, but down below is all communication centers that make for the information to go from top down or to come from bottom up. Okay? The final arbitrator is the cortex. Everything in between, though, is very important in terms of transmitting this information and in some cases interpreting it. But the final interpretation is happening in the cortex. I don't know if you are watching where you are news from the United States, or if you are looking at your internet. But there is nowadays, the last few days, there is a very big uproar and a very big fight going on about Terry Schiavo. You know the case? Okay. She is in a permanent vegetative state, which means that the cortex around her brain is dead. And of course her parents think that she can think with what is down below that. And the judges say that no, she cannot think. And this thing is a big situation. I don't know if she's alive. I know that everybody expects her to go from minute to minute. But the real question is something that has to do with the integrity of the nervous system. And what makes us human is, of course, the elaborate work the cortex does. But I have to tell you that lower animals, like frogs, for example, don't have anything resembling the cortex. They don't have anything resembling the thalamus. They don't have anything resembling all that. And they are still very alive. I don't know if they have, if I can realistically say, or anybody can realistically say, that we can prove that they think, or that they have a concept of self. So these questions are very difficult to answer. Okay? I guess that what made the judges decide the way they did is not the question of whether Skavos can think or not, or have a sense of self or not, but whether she is able to be of any practical use to our community. And I think this is what was more important, although nobody is willing to say that openly. Anyway, this doesn't mean that I'm for or against that, okay? I'm trying to see the question as a purely scientific question. Okay. So, in order for us to be able, we said we have to really look at the relationship between neuroanatomy and neurology, and I have to say that the cerebral hemispheres, and here you have a model of the brain, and next time we have the course, by the way, do you happen to have a model of the brain over there? Do you know if there is available a model brain, a plastic brain over there that you can take it apart?
I think they have lots of stuff.
No, I know they have specimens. No, I know they have specimens. I'm talking about if they have a plastic model. You haven't asked. Ask, because otherwise I'll try to bring you one from here, because then I can take, when we do this thing, I can take one apart here, you can take one apart there, and we can all talk much easier, just rather than just looking at pictures. Okay? But anyway, the cerebral hemispheres are the largest part of our brain, okay? And it starts from the anterior and medial cranial fossa. How's your Latin, by the way? Is it getting any better?
Yeah,
Good.
Latin.
Is it getting any better?
Yeah.
Good. All right. So the brain starts from over there and it extends backwards up to the point where the tentorium cerebelli is, which, if you look at my side, is approximately something that goes in like this, okay? But inside my skull. And these hemispheres are made up by the cortex, which is on the outside, and which is sitting on top of white matter and the basal ganglia, the tracts of the synaptic connections that we said, and of course ventricles. The ventricles are holes, they are big spaces, caverns inside the brain that are containing nothing else but cerebrospinal fluid, okay? But they tend to keep the shape of the brain standard by being able to change the pressure of the liquid that is inside there, the cerebrospinal fluid, and of course the production of it. Why I say that? Because, or how do I know that? Because if when the time comes to do some forensic medicine, you'll find out that when you open a skull, the brain has receded exactly because the blood pressure, and as a result, the cerebrospinal pressure has gone down to zero, so the brain loses its exact shape. Now, I have used here one of the most beautiful specimens I have seen on the internet, and it is in effect the back of the dorsum of a baby which has been was stillborn and has been dissected so that you can see the connection between the brain, which is a major part of the central nervous system, and the spinal cord. And as you see, out of the spinal cord come out the spinal nerves, which you can see here. They are very, very well dissected. And you can see in here why I insist that you have to look at it in terms of being a communications infrastructure, because all these nerves are nothing else but the equivalent of telephone wires going from the central nervous system, from the brain to the periphery and from the periphery back to the brain. Now, we have in effect two types of central nervous systems. Actually, we have only one, but it has two different functions. One is the part that we call the animistic nervous system, or the animal nervous system, or the nervous system itself, which has to do with what we're doing right now. I'm talking to you, I'm trying to explain to you different ideas, you are listening to me, you're trying to make out what I'm talking about. This is something that requires a lot of information processing, and it requires conscious thinking about things. And this is done by our brain. But apart from doing that, our brain has to keep its internal environment at a steady state. If you recall, this was an idea that came from Canon many years ago, in the 30s. We had talked about it again in the first semester, the idea of homeostasis. Well, there is such a nervous system, and it's called a vegetative nervous system, which makes all the necessary adjustments without asking us, without giving us reports, or at least reports that we consciously understand. In other words, if light falls on your eye, your pupil is going to constrict. And this is not going to ask you. It's not going to tell you that it's constricting. In fact, you are not going to know it, because as it constricts and less light hits your retina itself adjusts its sensitivity, so you don't understand it. You have to do a really radical change, like drive into a tunnel from bright sunlight before you understand that you cannot see because you don't have enough light, or the other way around, come out of a tunnel with a very, very large speed, driving a car, for example, where you see that your eye really squirts as your pupil constricts and tries to accommodate the large amount of light that hits your retina. It tries to reduce it. But unless you go to these extreme conditions, there is no way on earth that you are going to understand or be conscious of whether your retina is dilated or, your pupil is dilated or not, whether your retina is getting the same amount of light irrespective of what changes outside. You are not going to be conscious of that. And of course, as you see here, the same thing happens with many, many organs. Your heart rate is automatically adjusting. You get excited and your heart beats. You get in love and your heart beats fast. Well, you have no control over it. Okay? You may get some kind of gross report that your heart beats very fast. Or right before you go into an exam, you get the urge to go and pee. But all these things happen automatically, okay? You get just a final report on those. So, this is a big part of neurology, and remember we talked about incontinence, for example. We talked about headaches. This vegetative nervous system does get into that. It does have to do with it. And this is why I'm bringing it so early in the game. So, but if you take that apart and you look at the section of the brain, this is a coronal so-called section. If you look at the coronal section, you're going to realize that apart from the gray area that you have all around this picture, all the white matter that you see is nothing else but tracts of nerve fibers that bring information to and forth from the cortex. The cortex, by the way, is very thin. It is between 2 or 2.5 or 1.5, let's say, and 4.5 millimeters thick. Okay? its total size is like 4 pieces of paper, like the regular pieces of paper that you have in front of you to jot down notes. If you took all these foldings and you had expand them, it comes out to about 2200 square centimeters. That's not very much. Okay? And if you take slices of the central nervous system at different levels, you're going to see that most of the area of the crosscut has to do with transfer of information. That is, you are cutting through what we call tracts. Tracts is nothing else but accumulation of nerve fibers that go one way or the other. That is, from the periphery centrally or from the center to the periphery. Okay? Those that come from the periphery and those come from all the tracts here on those pictures, you'll see that they end up with a T. And sometimes they have an F in front because instead of a tractus, we also use the word fasciculus. It means the same thing. Your Latin teacher is going to explain that to you. Okay, so if you look at these things, and we have put colors so that we can identify some structures, then you see that most of the nervous system has to do with the transfer of information rather than with its processing. And I want to tell you, of course, in the beginning, we started talking about Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, but I have to tell you that it was not only him that knew that our faculties reside inside our head. Other people were very, very advanced, and they were also very successful neurosurgeons. What you see here, you see a skull from Cinco Cerros in Peru. It is an adult female, prehistoric, who had had a neurosurgical operation done on her. And as you can see, the way the trephination has been done is really superb. I mean, there are very few doctors that can trephinate this good nowadays. Because the way you see it here, if you look around the square, what happens is they used to drill little holes there, managed to pass a wire underneath from one hole to the other, and then by pulling back and forth on